You are not average. You don't settle, and you sure as hell don't want a cookie cutter approach to answer complex problems. That's what Against the Herd podcast is all about. Spotlighting high performers who break the norm and chase what matters most: truth, transformation, and results that last. My guest today has done exactly that 2 times. Doug Souls isn't just a legendary cross-country coach, he's a system builder, a mad scientist of sorts, and a nonconformist who took two schools, Great Oaks in California and Herriman in Utah, from obscurity to national champions. At Great Oaks, he captured 14 California state titles and national championships. He then moved to Herman and in less than 2 years built a national championship team with guys who originally couldn't even break 5 minutes for the mile. He's the author of two books. The first book is called Becoming Varsity: How to Become a Championship Level Distance Runner. And the second book is called Building Championship Cross Country Programs. Today we unpack how he thinks, what he sees that others miss, and how anyone, whether you're a coach, entrepreneur, or high performer, can build something legendary by going all in. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I have to tell you that I'm really excited. I remember I told my boys that I was interviewing you, and they're like, "No, but how did you like get him on?" And I said, "I don't know. I just text him." He goes, "You just text him out of nowhere?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he said yes. I go, "Yeah." He said yes. So here we are. I appreciate you uh, being willing to hop on this call and sharing your insights.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good lesson for kids too, is like you never know until you ask. So might
Right.
as well reach out to people and see, that networking is a lot easier than most of us give credit to. Sometimes it's just a matter of just talking to somebody. So
Yeah, certainly, certainly. Well, I want to kickstart this with something that has fascinated once since like studying up on you and getting a deeper understanding. One of the things that like went to the top of the list was when you went to Harriman, uh, most of the guys hadn't even broken 5 minutes for the mile. And what was it, like 2 years later, you guys became national champs.
yep.
Most teams never even look at the national championship. Uh, what are most people overlooking? I mean, obviously you're running, but everybody's running. So what are people actually overlooking that made you think those differences, whether it's subtle or blaringly obvious?
Yeah, I mean, when I came in, my wife and I had a discussion about, I said I think all these kids are going to be low ferritin, and I've posited for a long time that that's probably the biggest issue with most teams in the country is that if you took any random team and just ran all of their ferritin levels, their iron stores in their blood, that they would have most of the kids in the team would be low, and so therefore you're getting much slower results than you could if you were, sitting at 100 in the ferritin side of things. So first thing I did is I came in and I got them all to go through and get their ferritin checked. And most of them did immediately. We just put it out to the parents and say, this is what I'm expecting. Send me a picture, send them what they need to do to bring it up. And so the majority of our kids brought up their ferritin levels to, closer to 100. And we had one that kind of was resisting a little bit. Mom wasn't sure about it. She waited. And then he started seeing all the rest of the kids making these jumps. And he said, okay, maybe I need to do this. And finally got mom on board and we got him going on his iron intake. And about a month and a half later, he looked at me and he goes, there's something to this ferritin. Like he goes, I feel like a different kid. From that point on, he, made our top seven and just absolutely dominated. And, went on to break 410, went on to run 854 for the 2 mile and take fourth at New Balance Nationals. And this is a kid that had never broken 520 or 519, in the first 2 years of high school. So I think there's a lot of coaches out there, they don't know what to do with it, so they just ignore it. And
Mm.
That's one of the hardest things because if it's a major component and you're not doing anything with it, the girl that you're coaching can get to 20 minutes if you don't check her ferritin, but if you fix her ferritin, maybe she's an 18-30 girl.
Right.
And now you start doing that towards 7, 8, 10, 15 kids. That team's a different team if they're all doing the right things with ferritin. I think that's one of the things that we fixed, early on here that showed them that they could do the things that they needed to do. The second thing was we had a lot of kids that could run pretty fast, but they didn't have the strength to withstand how hard they were pushing their bodies. And so they were often injured, right? So you have to ask yourself as a coach, are my athletes strong enough to handle the workouts that we're putting them through, the races that we're putting them through? And so when I came in, we kind of added in one component at a time. We learned the warm up, we learned all the different pieces, but slowly but surely, I didn't add them all in at the same time. So we would do certain things, and the kids would say, "Well, when are we going to do hits?" And I'm like, "Well, we'll do hits when we're ready for hits physically." And so slowly but surely, we added those pieces in over the next 6 months, and they went from being, I don't know if I'm a very fast runner to I think I can run a lot faster than I've ever run, and so that confidence went into that next cross country season because I took them over in track. Kind of used track to we were real low mileage. We were only going about 35 miles a week in track, just as I kind of figured it out and focused on strength and focused on building them up. Then when we rolled into cross country, we started to build mileage and go from there. And all of a sudden, they were just flying. And we went to our first meet, and they were all sprinting to the front because they just felt fantastic. And we dominated everybody that first meet. The big thing was we went to Woodbridge. There's 450 to 500 schools at Woodbridge,
Right.
and we're thinking to ourselves, we want to be up there with the top teams. We think we're pretty good. And of course, we won that. And after that, I think our kids realized, okay, not only is he telling us the truth, but it's working really well. And so once the buy-in was there, it was a piece of cake to get him, to go to the next level and eventually win the national title.
You mentioned about, the progressive overload, essentially, of
Mhm.
getting them acclimated to the training and allowing their body to adapt and be ready for the training. Um, One of the things that I'm curious about is who would you say has influenced you the most? Like, is there any particular, whether it was Lydiard or Jack Daniels or Canova or whatever the Norwegian, like, is there any one or any couple that you're like, I really gravitate towards this and it resembles this in some capacity?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to kind of read and understand all of them, but you got to be careful of being all in on one and
Right.
ignoring the others. So when I first started, I kind of learned a lot from Steve Chavez, who was the coach at Murrieta Valley back in early 2000s that was really dominant in California. And so I learned a lot from him, and he was a guy that was big V Hill. And so I read V Hill's book and went through and took as much as I could from the way Steve had taken V Hill and turned it into a high school schedule. And then our schedule kind of grew out of that. And over the course of time, we tried all sorts of crazy stuff. We tried, 2 lactate threshold workouts a week. We tried, higher mileage, 80 plus miles a week. We did a whole bunch of different things, Coach Noble and I. And then we got to the point where it was like, okay, you want to lock each one of those components into a sweet spot. Like we've got this figured out. Let's lock this in. Let's move on to the next thing we're going to kind of change and see what it
Right.
can do. I mean, I guess that's the best way to say that is trial and error. But we
Right.
really tried to make sure that as you look at each component, you're finding which piece makes the most sense. And sometimes as you change pieces over here, you got to go back and revisit
Right.
and up and down the other pieces. But we felt like we got to a point where we've got most of this stuff pretty dialed in. It's just a matter of changing workouts for weather and those types of things. But for the most part, we had a pretty stable training plan, year-round focus that could get them strong enough to not only compete well in cross country but also continue to get faster in track and field.
Did you find that you came into Herriman with a plan that was just like you were taking what you were doing that was working well at Great Oak and you just, hey, this is what we're doing? Or did you find, with the change in environment, you had to make changes with the altitude, you went from California to Utah. There is a difference both in terrain and in altitude and maybe even mindset. So did you find that you came in with this idea and you had to it's a different, completely different program, or it's fairly similar than what you were doing in Great Oaks?
I mean, it's a similar program, but yeah, obviously things like elevation come into play. So I think the first thing I would say to anybody out there is you've got to master your environment, right? You've got to figure out what works for where you were at. And in California, where it was sunny year round and we could kind of just spread everything out, it was easy. Here, in the wintertime, we're having to run in 27 degrees with 2 inches of snow and 30-mile-an-hour winds. That's not fun. And so it's a little bit harder to sell the fun factor, especially in the wintertime, to certain kids. And I think that's slowed our girls' progression quite a bit. And so we're trying to figure out ways around that so that we can, not only get kids out, but keep them out and get them to buy in, because the only real way to get faster is to consistently train. And so we want to keep them healthy and we want to keep them consistently working. And eventually we know those breakthroughs will come through. So basically, I took the concepts and I took the components that we did at Great Oak, and we looked at it and said, what is it that needs to happen here? So as we put pieces in one at a time in that first track season, and some didn't even come in into that next cross country season, we started to ask the question, my wife and I, what do we need to hold back? What do we probably not need to do here that we did down there? And I think, you've got to find each piece and fine tune it and see what works. Obviously, a lot of the strength stuff was what these kids needed. So a big focus was on strength, on slowly but surely growing the mileage. We do a lot less visualization up here, and I can't pinpoint why that is, but that is something that we do less of. And we do, certain components, like we used to do a lot of stadiums. We don't do those as much because we're able to get it in other areas and, other strength components. So I think when you look at it, you've got to ask yourself, what am I trying to build? What's different about this environment than the last environment? And, where do we go from here? So, I think the mileage is a little less, the intensity is a little bit less. Um, the kids are different. In California, the focus from the kids and the parents was find something you're good at and go all in. Here, it's very much a focus on being good at a lot of different things. And so when we talk about average, you get a lot of kids that are very average at a lot of things, but they do a lot of things. And so, they experience piano, they experience the choir group, they experience working, they experience going on a lot of camps in the summer. They have a balance in life that's great, but that doesn't usually lead to championships or success. So for me, my job is to come in and say, hey, the way you do it isn't important, but it's showing them another way and saying, hey, we can be successful this way too. There is some sacrifice to it, but if you really want to get there, I can lead you down that path. To me, great coaching isn't forcing kids to do anything. It's being a leader and saying, I'm going to go this way and this way success. If you want to find that success, come with me.
Where did you get that from? Because too many coaches think it's about being authoritarian and saying, "Hey, that's it. Like this, I need to force you to do this stuff." You don't seem to have that, and buy-in from your athletes seems to be fairly important. Where did this come from? Some kind of mentorship? Did you always have this vision? Like, tell me a little bit about that.
No, you know what, I learned it the hard way. We got to, I want to say it was CIF prelims one year. We had a really solid girls team in our early years. This is like year 3 or 4 at Great Oak. Um, and we got to CIF prelims, and it should have been a slam dunk. Easy, just move on and do what we need to do. And a bunch of the girls were just ready to be done. And so they really didn't even try. And I'm at the end watching it all crumble, going, what in the world just happened? Like, that's not what we've been working towards. And as a coach, you ask yourself, what just happened, right? And slowly but surely, the girls that did care, that did want to move on to state and did want to make it to the next level, ratted out the girls that kind of didn't. And they said, well, this is what these other girls are saying. They're saying, I just want to be done. I just want to go to the beach. I just want to go shopping. I want to go do normal things. And so what I really came to an understanding of was these kids are not going to go all in on my goals. What I want to accomplish and what they want to accomplish are two totally different things right now. And so that led to us starting in May. We do a top 16 meeting where we sit down with the 16 top boys and the 16 top girls, and we plan out the cross country season. They set the schedule, they set the goals, they focus on what it is that they want to accomplish. And as coaches, our job's to guide them and say, well, that's not really a goal, or that's not something that's challenging enough for you, but really to let them figure out what it is that they want to create in their program. And as you can see, our boys have been a lot more gung ho about success than the girls have been at this point. The girls are still kind of in that, well, we'd like to make it to state, we'd like to do some of these things type phase, where the boys have been, we want to win the national championship. So, it takes time. It took time, ironically, in the reverse order, at Great Oak, for the boys to catch up to where the girls were at. But once they did, they became, pretty dominant. So it takes time to find that level of success. And I think on my side of it, once I realized that the kids needed to set the goals that they were willing to work towards, we would be successful. So I look at myself as guiding them to the goals that they've set out for me, and for themselves to try to accomplish, instead of, hey, I want to win the national title and you guys don't find a way to screw this up for me. You know what I mean? So it really is. Instead of being in charge and saying, do, now you're saying, hey, this is what we need to do to get you to your goals. And it's amazing. Kids will work really hard for things that they find value in.
Right. Oh, at different stages, like they've already gotten the taste of a national championship. At least the girls
The
at
guys,
Herman, the guys have. Okay. There's a very big difference when you're operating at that caliber that creates a certain level of momentum and standard. If you're starting a team, and I don't know if you can remember that, but if you're
I've
starting
started
a
a
team
couple.
that
Yeah.
doesn't have, like, there's a point where you don't know what you don't know. Like, for most kids, that may not even be on their radar. How do you, as a coach, give that level of freedom, um, or do you give that level of freedom right from the beginning, or do you at the beginning need to basically guide the vision because they don't really know what they don't know yet? You've seen what's possible, but they maybe haven't. And so is there, at this stage, I do a little bit more hand holding. Actually, it happens with kids. Like, I have three kids. And so when they're little, it, this isn't a democracy when they're little. It's like, no, this is the way we need to do it because I'm guiding you. As they get a little bit older, it becomes a little bit more now, hey, how are you seeing this? And it becomes a little bit more coaching as they get older and older because now they have context and they have a foundation to build from. So I guess maybe the question is in the absence of a foundation of what's possible, how do you coach them up to that level?
I mean, you can you can look at it through the grades. The freshman year, I'll use Tayshawn Agomo as an example. As a freshman, Tayshawn was running on talent, right? He just kind of did what everybody else was doing, and he was pretty fast and he ran on talent. Each year, he progressively understood a little bit better. If I do all the little things, if I do all the things that coach is asking me to do, I can reach the goals that I'm working towards. So in the early years, his freshman year, it was the standard, Tayshawn, just shut up and run. Just do the things we're asking you to do, right? Towards the tail end of it, where he's a senior and I'm calling him at nationals going, hey, did you pick up the packet? He's on top of everything. Like, I'm trying to keep up with him. So, that level of confidence comes when you've put in the work, and you understand what the end results are going to be. It's pretty easy to be successful. So I think the most important thing is you can't expect people that have no experience and no knowledge to utilize experience and knowledge, right? So that's where you as the coach come in, and you try to, excuse me, you try to make sure that you support that foundation. But along the way, your job is to look at them and ask them questions to see if they've gained that knowledge yet, right? And we kind of go into a mini war every time we race a cross country race. It's 250 kids running crazily one direction, right? So now all of a sudden you're in the middle and thrust in the middle of that little war march, and you've got to decide how you're going to survive it. And so, you do that year after year, you're going to really start to learn, okay, this is how I'm going to handle my anxiety. This is how I'm going to plan for my pre-race. This is what I'm going to do if such and such happens in the race. And as they get that experience, then they start formulating their own opinions of what they think they should do and maybe what their teammates should do. And so, if I get a new kid, I'll pull them aside and say, hey, I think you should do this time, and here's why. But a kid like Tayshawn, I'll just say, hey, how are you feeling? What do you see? And Tayshawn's going to say, well, I think if I go out in 53, that it's going to put me in position to be able to kick the last lap and run a 148. And then I'll, as a coach, then I'm more of a mentor at that point, saying, well, last time you went out in 53, you crashed and burned. Maybe let's try 54, happy medium between 53 and 55. Let's try 54 and see if we can push a little harder at the end and maybe still hit the goal. And so that's the way I approach it. Is when they're younger, I'm really trying to give them the structure and the focus. In our program, we go out to cross country. We'll tell them, the number one thing is you need to be here. Second thing is you need to do the things your coaches ask you to do. 3, do it with a smile on your face, and 4, be a good teammate. If you can do those 4 things, you're going to be successful, right? So we try to impart that upon the athletes, and then as they grow in terms of leadership, some kids are ready as freshmen and sophomores to be leaders, but other kids, they won't even find it until maybe late into their senior year, if at all. But our job as coaches is to find the leadership capabilities in each athlete. And sometimes that's, being loud and proud. And sometimes that's the kid that just shows up every day and supports his teammates. And sometimes it's the kid that just gets the speed ladders each morning, whatever. You got to find what the strength is for that kid and give them the ability to continue to grow with it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that because I think that sometimes what gets lost is the understanding of what stage or maturity a team is at. And so a
Mm.
coach will look at this and be like, "Oh, but you can't," or a coach that's too far ahead d doesn't remember what it was like over there. Because once you have the horses all running in the same direction, it's about course correcting as opposed to getting them to go. A team
Yeah.
that's just starting out is, hey, how do we get people out there to just get started? Once
Yeah.
you have that momentum going, you're playing a different game. So I appreciate you sharing the distinctions there because I think that's really powerful. Now, along the lines of that, in was it making varsity? No,
Becoming varsity.
becoming varsity. You
Yeah.
you mentioned something along the lines of eliminating choice in that book. And it kind of goes against the idea of like, hey, follow your feelings advice. And so how is that a maturity thing? Is that more for at the beginning that, hey, right now just we're eliminating choices? Or like how are you turning the elimination of choice into a weapon or an asset? And when is that when is that important to do? And when is there time to give more rope?
Yeah, I mean the focus there is really as a human being, often we'll find the easiest path or the more fun path, or the path that has all of our friends on it, instead of the path that is going to be more of a successful path for us long term. So what I'm trying to get athletes to understand is if you give yourself the opportunity to say, maybe I'll go to cross country practice tomorrow for summer, maybe I won't, you're not going to find that success because there's going to be X amount of times that you just say, I'm not going to go. So to get to that level of really being a varsity athlete, you need to learn to take certain choices off the table for yourself. There isn't a choice of whether or not I'm going to the summer practices. I'm going to go to every summer practice, right? That's the first step into becoming successful. I don't wake up in the morning and decide I'm going to go teach today. I already know that I'm getting up and I'm going to teach and I'm going to coach, and that's just how it works. It would be torture if every day I got up and decided maybe I'll go, maybe I won't, right? So, as adults, we learn naturally to filter out, at least successful adults, learn how to filter out what decisions we get to make, versus what I'm going to take to lunch versus whether I'm going to go to work or not, whether I'm going to show up to practice or not, whether I'm going to spend 2.5 hours of practice versus 30 minutes. Trying to make good decisions and blocking out the bad ones, I think, are some of the most important things as you grow, as a human. And I'm pretty good at filtering things. I'm good at saying, okay, I'm only going to focus, in this box. for the next 3 hours, and everything else is non-existent to me. And I realize not everybody has that ability, but the better you get at that, the better you can really get at accomplishing a lot of the things that you want to accomplish. So, it's very difficult with all the distractions as an adult, whether it's your children or your church responsibilities, work, or whatever is pulling at you, to stop and say, I need to spend the next 3 hours being a coach, even though I just spent 3 or 4 hours being a coach. And so, you've got to find for you what's that filter. So what I'm writing in that book, for athletes, is saying, if you want to be a successful varsity athlete, the first thing you're going to do is to take away the stupid choices. You're not going to say, okay, I'm going to eat the cheesecake versus I'm going to eat the vegetables. You're going to start to eliminate the bad choices, and only give yourself the option of making good decisions.
That's fantastic. You, you know, I don't get I don't get the opportunity to speak to many coaches that have uh it would seem to me that you've studied the psychology part, whether formally or informally, or at the very least, you're very much aware of how much the psychology and uh is just as important and probably more important than any of the other stuff because if there's no buy-in, if there's no um, connection to the goal that they want, then there's going to be friction. There's going to be lack of clarity. Now, there's a lack of clarity. You now start putting up resistance along the way. I just kind of want to veer off a little bit because I'm I'm actually quite fascinated by you and not just the method. Your background, is it psychology? Is it anything of the sort? Like, did you think that you were going to get into coaching? Like, where did this all come from? Because the way you speak and the way you're looking at things is the same things I find with my high level executives, high level athletes that I coach and I work with. And I don't see it as often at the high school level. And so I'm just curious where this comes from and is this nature or nurture?
Yeah, I'm my older sister and I are very similar in that way. And I would say it's probably a lot of nature, a lot of genetic coming from our dad. We had a dad that was very powerful personality, and I think we by nature got some of that, and I think that's a big part of it. But um, I grew up extremely poor, you know, and I wanted to be successful. And I would hang out with a lot of successful people. And you go to these really nice houses, and you live in a little tiny shack. You start asking that question: how do I get to this level? Like, when do I get to be in the nice house, right? And so I think what I learned as a young person is I can accomplish anything I'm willing to put the time and effort into accomplishing,
Mm,
right? And that's really one of the biggest, most important things. And what I really learned along the way is there are a lot of people that don't want to help you. There are people that will help you, but there's a lot of people that don't want to see your vision. They don't want to help you with what you're trying to do. And so you need to be able to get people to do what you want them to do. And I got pretty good at that as I was growing up, learning that, okay, if there's certain things that I want the Barclays, I want the Jordans, I want the nice things, but I don't have a lot of money for it. How do I negotiate that with my grandparents? How do I negotiate that with different people to acquire the things that I need to be, in my mind at that time, successful? Right? If I don't have Jordans, then I'm not successful. So at that age, at that mindset, how do I look at this puzzle and fit those pieces together? And so now it's the same thing. When I was younger, it was, how do I get the baseball cards that I want? Right? How do I get the girlfriend that I want? How do I run the times that I want? When you look at all those different pieces, it starts to become a game. It starts to become a puzzle. And then what you've got to ask yourself is, what are the rules to this game that are different than the other games? And how do I master those to the point where I'm better than everybody next to me? And so, if you want to get the better girlfriend, then you better be, in most aspects, better than the other options that girl has. If you want to get the best baseball cards, then you better figure out what are the best baseball cards and how much time and energy do I need to spend to raise the money to get the ones that are going to bring me the joy of the collecting. So I found that as I applied that to coaching, How do I get the athletes that I need? How do I, how do I ask the right questions to the right people? How do I network with people? And that's the thing. I mean, it's not like I created everything off the top of my head. I've sat in clinic after clinic. I've asked question after question. I've done everything that I can on my end to read the books, to find the posts, to do all the things that I can do to put that information in my brain. And now that I've got it, I've got to say to myself, okay, what are the rules of this game, and how do I find a way to be better at it than everybody else? So, long story short, I think I've always been pretty good at playing games, and seeing the puzzle and understanding what it is that you need to do. I see a lot of people that are very good at playing games, but they're not good enough at the interpersonal skills, the manipulation skills that it takes to figure out, okay, this one kid will be great if I can get him to do this, right? He'll be really good if I can get him to buy into this concept. And if you're good enough with those skill sets, then you can get him to buy in. If you're not, then eventually he's going to switch and he's going to go do mountain biking or something else that draws his attention, right? So a lot of
Yeah.
the times, success is figuring out which kids you need and then figuring out how to get them out there. If you have the kids, then you're hard to beat. If you don't have the kids, then you're pretty easy to beat, right? So our
Right.
boys and girls have been pretty good examples of that. We've had the kids on the boys' side, and we've been almost impossible to beat for the last 3 years. But our girls have had some holes, and so we've had a good girls team, but not a national level girls team really yet.
Okay. You said there was a phrase that you used there as you were kind of going back in time, so to speak, that you said, I found that a lot of people aren't willing to help you reach whatever your goal is, that you have to find ways of communicating and, being able to adapt to be able to get that buy-in or get that alignment from people. Um, One of the things I've heard about you, and as is evident by the fact that we're having this conversation, is that you're actually quite gracious with your time and you're not stingy with what you know. You actually are freely sharing it and looking to help. And you get, I would maybe say, just as much joy and excitement from someone else's success that you were able to help as much as the success you create, for your team and for yourself. Do you feel that's a response to the environment that you kind of grew up in, and it's your way of maybe deciding to make your own change?
I think the most important thing there was when I got into really the cross country community, because I was a 4 year college sprinter. I was not really a distance runner. Ran 1 year of cross country in high school, but I'm thick, so running cross country was like torture. So for me, what I learned was once I got into the cross country community, everybody was very sharing. I'll send you this, I'll send you that. Hey, what do you need? I didn't have a lot of people in cross country telling me no. They weren't hoarding secrets. They were going. I would go to the LA 84 clinics, and they would say, "Here, take my training plan. Take our core work. Take our warm up. Take all these different pieces, and utilize them to make your program and your athletes better." And so, like I said, when you're trying to figure out how to win the game, you've got to find all the different pieces, lock those pieces in so that you're good. And so, a lot of those pieces came from other coaches. I just can't master the warm up. Well, take what you can from what Ken does. You can find most of those pieces out there, and you've got to figure out what works for you. Just like everybody else, when we started, we jogged for 10 minutes, we did 20 push-ups and 40 crunches, and that was our warm-up, right? Very different than the warm-up we do, which is pretty intense. So you're going to have to evolve as a coach, and you're going to have to put the time and effort in there. But if everybody's willing to give it to you, you can't now say, okay, now that I have all this knowledge and ability and success, now I'm not going to share it with others. Like that just doesn't, to me, it doesn't make sense. The coolest thing, the best thing for me is, at NXN this year, I think I had like 6 or 7 coaches that had made it up there. A lot of them for their first time that came up and shook my hand and said, hey, your books are a lot of the reason that we're here. Like we've modeled our program after what you're doing at Herriman, and now we're finding that success and we're able to make it 10xn. That's to me, that's the best thing in the world. My wife will say, "Well, don't give all your secrets away." And to me, there aren't a lot of secrets in cross country. Most of us have figured out that we're all doing a tempo run, we're all doing a little VO2, or we're all doing a long run, and the rest is just kind of getting out there and running. So if all the workouts are the same, what is the difference, right? And so my job is to say, hey, what about this? What component are you missing here? What are you missing there? And I get a lot of people that reach out and say, hey, can you look at my training and give me some advice? And what I see in the training is a lot of guessing, and not quite confident in what they're doing, and that's why they're asking for a little bit of help. So that's why I put the training plans in the books. You can look at them and get an idea of, hey,
Right.
this is what this guy that wins a lot does, and start to determine, is this close to what we're doing, or are we on the moon compared to this guy? And so people can at least stop and think. And the ones that people handed to me when I would go to coaching clinics and say, hey, here's our training plan. I didn't always use it, but I did take a look at it and say, okay, well, they're finding this level of success and they're running less than we are. They're running more than we are. And it helps you kind of find those sweet spots in your own program.
Right. Wow. That's pretty solid. I asked my one of my friends who's a coach for high school, and I told him I was gonna have an interview. I was like, hey, if you could ask him one question, what would it be? And so he's like, hey, as a coach, what are his non-negotiables? So like what are your non-negotiables for your athletes? What are your non-negotiables for your staff that you feel like have led to the success and the excellence that you've built?
So the way that I look at any given season would be kind of like a river, right? We're flowing along this river, and everybody's either in the boat or everybody's on their own little flotation device, and we're all holding on together and we're going there. It's the athletes that don't want to travel that with us. They're kind of doing their own thing. They're not in the boat with us. They're not going the direction that we want. Those are the athletes that cause the greatest amount of harm. And it might be parents, it might be athletes, it might be administration, whatever it is. You're going to have people outside that boat that are saying, I don't think you should do it that way. And I think at the end of the day, you've got to figure out what your plan is based on the goals that have been given to you by the athletes that you've helped guide. But you've got to say to yourself, okay, what are things that are really important to what we're trying to do? To me, attendance at practice is huge, right? We just set the national record in the 4x8. How? We had a group of guys that barely missed practice for years, right? So those guys, when they got there, were ultimately prepared for the task at hand. And so, what I try to get the athletes to understand is you've got to buy in, you got to show up, and you've got to trust that what we're doing together is going to get you there. And even to this day, I'm still going to run into a few athletes that are like, well, I don't want to do it that way, and I don't believe in this, or I don't believe in that. And um, the problem with society today is there's almost too much information,
Right.
right? If I decide I think I want to know more about form, I can jump on YouTube and watch 125 videos on form, and now I'm an expert, right?
Right.
And often what happens is there's a difference between knowledge and application. So we end up with students that have studied things and they think they understand, or parents that ran a 5K one time and now they're an expert, trying to dictate to somebody that has actually won national championships and understands exactly what their child needs based on what they've seen from those kids and workouts and effort. And so I think the most important thing is being so in charge that you don't have to be um, reminding people that you're in charge. So often when we like people get disappointed because they'll come to our practices and things will happen and I'm not involved in them at all. The warm-ups happen, the captain's lead core, the other coaches are involved in different things that I'll often come in and step in an hour into practice and say, okay, here, this is what we're going to do. And I think as you get really good at it, what you try to do is say, here are the ranges for the different levels that we have today. If you are a varsity kid, you're running somewhere between 7 and 10. If you're a JV kid, you're running somewhere between, 5 and 7. If you're a rookie, you might be running somewhere between 1 and 3 today. And then when you come back, you've got, a core hit, or you've got plows and med balls, or whatever it is that you need to do. But I think everybody there has an understanding, what level am I at? And if I'm not, I need to ask, what am I trying to get to? Um, And, does my coach entrust me to go out there and try to work for it? What I usually struggle with is people that don't want to be there, but someone has forced them to be there,
Mm,
because they don't want to listen to anybody because they don't truly want to be there. The kids that want to be there almost implicitly say, "What's next?" Because they want to be there and they want to get better. I don't think there's anybody out there that can question the results at this point, because we've had insane results at Herriman, rather quickly.
right.
But ultimately, there are always going to be people that won't buy in, no matter who you are or what you do. They'll still find a reason, and it's usually they have another sport, or they have a parent that believes. Often I find it with triathlete dads, that they know everything, right? The dad knows everything because he does the triathlon, and so it's very hard to reach those kids and get them to listen to you as a coach, because they're getting an earful from dad every night.
Yeah.
And so you do have to get parents to understand their role. You do have to get the athletes to understand their role and how they're going to improve. You can sit in an algebra class and not learn a thing. Be there every single day and not learn a thing. And so we go out of our way to try to get the kids to understand, like, we're going to do things to get better, not do things to get them done.
Yeah. Injuries. That is one of the most crippling things, pardon the pun, right? To progress. What have you found that has been either like, how do you address it before it becomes full blown? And then on the flip side, if somebody does get injured, what have you found that makes the difference for them when they come back that they're ready? So I guess the first one is, how do you prevent it? What are you looking for? And what are you doing to kind of nip it in the bud? And then if it's gone, if it's crossed the line and now it's there, what are you doing to ensure that when they return, they're actually ready to perform and not just now they got to build up their fitness?
Yeah. One of the things we remind the kids, and we actually have them repeat to us, is, what's the best way to get injured? And they'll say, too much too fast, right? So if you're doing too many things too quickly in your training, build up, then you're probably going to get hurt, because your body's not ready to handle all of those things. So what we try to get them to understand is, you need to be in the right shoes. You need to build up like steps, not massive jumps, but slowly but surely building each step. And when you've mastered that step, you move to the next one. Um, and you need to make sure that you're doing the right amount of strength work so that you can handle the amount of stuff that you're going to put in. So our base for most kids is less about mileage and more about really mastering the ancillary stuff, really doing their plows and med balls, their hills, their core work, their speed ladders, their box jumps, all of the different pieces that they need to do, so that when we introduce, hits, they can handle the speed and the veracity of what we're trying to accomplish there. When we get to an intense VO2 workout, or a fartlek, or maybe a faster tempo, that they're able to handle the stresses that are being put on their body, right? We know mentally they can handle a lot of that stuff, but physically, they can't. So when I came into the program, we had an athlete that was, pretty solid athlete, like a 423 miler, and had some success in some cross country races. And everybody said, "Oh, he's a great kid, but he's always hurt. He's always hurt. So you're probably not going to get much out of him." And what I looked at was, this kid naturally can run at such a high level that I think every time we throw him in a race, he's getting hurt, because his body can't handle the stresses that he's putting on himself. And so as we added in the components that raised the level of strength for him, in the 2 years that I coached him, he had zero injuries. Major injuries, anything that kept him out of a meet. Like, he'll have, those little pain in the shins or whatever here and there, but never had anything that kept him out of a meet, right? So um, I think the most important thing as a coach is asking yourself, am I pushing the kids too much too soon, right? Do I have these athletes doing the right amount of strength work to be able to handle the workouts that I'm going to put them through later? Because like, when I look at other people's training, right off the bat, they're hammering these kids with a really tough workout. And it's like, okay, well, what have you done with those kids to make sure they can handle that workout, right?
Right.
That's the biggest question, because if you're doing workouts that you don't really have any business doing, your chance of injury goes up. Um, and as I've gotten older, I think the ancillary work is the answer to a lot of those questions, right? And if you ask a PT, they're going to tell you if you're doing all these other, physical support things for your body to make sure everything's going the right way, then you lower your chance of having an injury.
Right.
And so I think that's one of the things I've improved upon over the, maybe the last 10 years as a coach, is really understanding that mileage is mileage. But ancillary work can really fill in the gaps of their strength side of things, their health side of things, and make sure they're good. Stress fractures are still going to occur, but we do try to look at supplementation. Right? Are you getting enough protein? Are you taking vitamin K2? Are you taking they make some pretty good older person vitamins that you can take that are specifically geared towards bone health to try to keep people, if they fall down, they don't fracture themselves. That stuff works really well, so you can get lots of different things like that on Amazon. And so we really try to make sure our athletes understand that they do need to supplement, and they do need to make sure that their bone health is extremely strong and that they're durable. I call them adamantium bones, so that we have very few stress fractures. And that's the goal. And we haven't lost a lot of kids, knock on wood, to stress fractures over the years. There's been a couple in there, but I think if you take 25 random kids in any program and you just have them do an hour worth of workouts a day, there's always going to be X amount of those kids that are going to be hurt because they have some deficiency somewhere. They have a weakness somewhere. They're in the wrong shoes. They're pushing themselves too hard in a certain situation, and maybe they need to pull back. So really trying to teach those things to athletes and get them to understand it's slowly but surely over the course of this 6-month season, building to be able to handle the stresses we're going to put on you.
That's that's pretty powerful, and I hope people take from that. Like one of the things that I heard was, hey, how do you prepare the tissues to deal with the stress of what people think of when they think of, running hard,
Right.
sprints, the hit, the tempos, all those things that require the tissue to adapt. And most people think, oh, the way we make it adapt is have them do it. And
Mhm.
yes, but the problem is that most people do it too fast. In other words, okay, you want to do it like that, you may be able to, but it will actually take longer because what you're looking for is tissue adaptation. And so
Right.
you're not stressing the fitness component enough to get the tissues the stress that they need, or you're going the opposite. Like in other words, your cardiovascular system is more developed than the tissue is actually allowing at a higher intensity. So
Yep.
what I heard you say is like, hey, we're doing the core work, we're doing the agility ladder, the plyo stuff, all with the sole purpose of preparing the tissue beforehand so that the tissue is par with the cardiovascular system. And now when we put them together, you're minimizing, not eliminating, because there may be those ancillary things that you're talking about. Some of those things may be off that you don't see at the moment until something happens and you're like, oh, now they tell me that they haven't changed their shoes in a year, or now like because there's a lot of things you're juggling. You can't pay attention to every single detail all the time, and that's
Right.
part of taking that responsibility and ownership for yourself. And I think that's one of the things that I'm getting from you is a big part of this is not just guiding them, but it's also teaching them what they need to be paying attention to. And as they mature, presumably they're better off. They've gotten more exposure to it, so they have better understanding of it, and they take that ownership. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. Yeah. The better they get at taking care of themselves and understanding each one of those components, the better off they're going to be. And the hardest thing is right when you get them right where you want, where they can do everything that you want, then they graduate and a new group of kids that know nothing comes in, right? So that's the challenge of high school. You're always teaching the same things over and over. And I think sometimes we get complacent. We got to realize I haven't taught this information to this group of kids yet. So you got to try to remember those things and get it get it to the athletes.
That's a great point. That is a great point. Um, I want to wrap this up, but I have two main questions left, which are number one, fast forward 10 years from now, those kids that you've coached and you've coached with high success, what does success look like for you as a coach watching them 10 years down the line? I know it's a big ask because it's 10 years, but I don't know if you've thought that far. But I'd be curious to see what that could look like for you.
Well, the funny thing is that's kind of where I'm at with a lot of the Great Oak kids,
Mm.
from a lot of my top teams in that mid 20 teens. So we're 10 years away from my national championship boys team that won it in 2015. So I think the most important thing with a lot of those kids is, did they go to college? Did they get some free money? Did they have an experience? And then where did that lead? And if you go down the list of all of those kids, most of them are in great jobs. They're working hard. They're living the life that they want to live, and they seem to be happy people. I think that one of the biggest rewards, and we almost all of us get this at some point, is when somebody comes back and says, "Hey, you made a big difference in our life." And you get that on both sides. I've had kids that have chastised me for working them too hard and taking away all the fun of high school, and I've had athletes that have said, it's the structure. I had a kid who's an adult now from about that range, 2013, 2014, that reached out to me and said, "Hey, can you send me training plans? Like, I'm a police officer now, and I'm in charge of training some of these people, in our police district here, and I want to make sure that we're doing the right stuff because I learned how to do it when I was in your program, and I've always kept that mindset that as long as I'm doing these things, I'm going to be successful. Can you send me those training plans?" And that, I think, when you get somebody that reaches out to you like that, and shares that kind of concept, like, "Hey, you played a role in my physical health over the course of the last 10 years." That's a huge thing as well. So with social media, we're actually able to kind of stay in touch and get an idea. I just had one of the girls from my 2017 through 2019 teams just got married to a professional football player, right? So you start looking at those things and you see them and you're like, okay, really all I want, especially as I get older here, I'm 49 now. You start looking at it, you just hope that these kids find some level of happiness. And some do a really good job of that, and some don't. But as a coach, your goal is to help them. Now, the Great Oak kids, like I said, the focus often was on success. The kids at Herriman, I think there's obviously an LDS component there religiously. There's so a lot of those boys that have run for me over the last couple of years and graduated are all on missions for the church, and so I think for them, a lot of them is, are they married? Do they have two kids? Do they have a good job? Are they keeping their commandments? Are they doing those types of things? And if the answer is yes across, then if I played any role in helping to help them do those types of things, then I've found that success. If their college was $200,000 less than it would have been had they not gone through my program, then even more so, it's a success, right? So, I don't know how to quantify that, but if you as a coach can help athletes, who are becoming adults, save that money instead of coming out figuring out how to pay off loans, they're coming out figuring out how to buy a house. You may have put them 5 to 10 years, maybe 15 years ahead of where they would have been had they not been in you not been in their life. So I would hope that people look at me and say, "Hey, this guy opened doors for me. This guy led me down a path of hard work and dedication and focus." I have found that that's not always the case, but I've found that the majority of kids do look at it that way, which I think is great.
Ah, what a blessing. What a blessing. Final question. You you are very gracious with your time, and I'm truly grateful for the fact that we've had this conversation. Like I said, at the beginning of this, I literally texted you and said, "Hey, would you be open to do this?" And you're like, "Sure, why not?" So, um, I want to first of all thank you for that because it's people are busy. And I appreciate, I'm sure you're busy with a million other things. So I appreciate you sharing this and the fact that we get to capture this and share this with anyone that wants to see this and gets to peel back the layers of not just hey, I'm going to go for this amount of run. You can get that in the book, but
Mhm.
hopefully what we've been able to extract here is something, the man behind it, the understanding of why these things matter. And if you were looking for success, that hunger for growth and constant evolution. Like one of the things that really stood out in this conversation is your willingness to evaluate a situation and say, how can I make it better? Or how do I make it work for this person? How do I align it so that we can achieve their goals in a way that makes sense. So I first and foremost, I just want to honor you and say thank you for being showing up in that way and for
Yep.
doing that. I guess the last question that I'd have for you is if there was one message that you could share uh, with both runners and like anyone that you just want to share into this world, what would that message be, and why would that be important to you?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you got to decide who and what you want to be, right? If you're a runner and you want to be the state champion, there's a lot of work involved in making that happen. If you're a coach and you want a state championship team, there's a lot of work involved in making that happen. And so, um, I think there's the old adage is the difference between dreams and goals and all of that. If you really want to make things happen, and it really comes down to the amount of time and effort you're willing to put in. What things are you willing to sacrifice to get to the level that you want to get to, right? And so one of the first things I said to Herriman kids was, you need to get rid of jobs. This is where the work is at, is right here.
Mm,
And a lot of kids looked at me like I was crazy because it's very common for teenagers to work here. Where in California, none of them worked. They all just showed up and did whatever their focus was, which was for me was the running side. And so, if you want to be successful, you got to be willing to sacrifice time away from people and things that you love. You've got to be able to balance. How much effort you're going to put in work. I mean, I could be worth a lot of money if I put the same energy into the business world that I put into a sport that doesn't pay a whole lot of money, right? And so, I made those sacrifices where I found that I valued the dollar sign in my bank account less than the success that we found on the course or on the track. And so you have to ask yourself those questions: is what is it that drives you? Money doesn't drive me. I don't wake up in the morning trying to figure out how to make more money. I wake up in the morning and try to figure out how to beat the people that still stand in my way in that game. So you have to ask yourself, who is it that I need to beat? What is it that I need to do to get there? And I do see that often with parents that will say, okay, the current coach that we have cannot get my kid to where we want him to go. And that's why you're seeing, I think, more and more today, you're seeing transfers than we did, 15, 20 years
right.
ago, because parents are waking up to the game as well and saying, okay, it's really hard to get a scholarship today, really hard. I need to take my kid to a coach that can get him there. I need to find a club coach that can get him there. I need to do things differently than what the masses are doing to set my child apart. And it's funny because that's criticized by many people, but yet that's exactly the way the system has evolved to where you have a chance of getting a scholarship. If you're not one of the elite kids. And so, we've gotten ourselves into a situation where if you want to be ultra successful, you really have to go all in. That's one of the tenets in the books that you really want to be successful. You're going to have to learn that poker adage that it's time to go all in, and everything else is going to be secondary to this goal and this success. Otherwise, you run cross country, you run track. You're not doing it to be anything. You're just doing it as an activity, right? So I try to explain to our kids there's a difference between activity and commitment. And if you want it as an activity, there's a spot over there on the JV. If you want to be successful in what we're trying to do and beyond in the river and be in the boat, then you show up every day and you do everything that you can to be as exceptional as you possibly can be, and often that's not eating the cheesecake. It's giving up the donuts. It's, making sure that you're getting enough sleep. One of the hardest things in the world for teenagers is to turn the brain off and close their eyes, right? So, um, like I said, I try to be a guide, and I try to show people how to find that success. And I think if you're a coach and you want to do that as well, be less worried about telling people what to do and more worried about understanding where they're trying to get and can you get them there. So switch from the being in charge mentality to the guide mentality, because instead of you putting it all on them, now you're putting it on yourself. And when you take responsibility for it, you can lay awake at night trying to figure out how to get the kids to follow you whichever direction you need to go, instead of demanding it of them and finding that they don't care either way.
Wow. Well, Doug, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time and the insight that you've shared. Thank you for being uh, a guide, both for your kids and really for this community, cross country community. And I think zooming out a little bit further, when we look at the world, what I see is a person dedicated and committed to making the world better by creating excellence and creating more humans that have more discipline, more clarity and vision, and the execution to make that happen. And I think that as a result, that ripple effect, you're making the world a better place as a result of it. So I want to thank you in advance. All
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
right, Doug. Have a great one.
Thank you. You too.
You've just heard another unfiltered dose of the Against the Herd podcast. If you're tired of playing by the rules that keep you stuck, make sure to subscribe, leave a review. Want to go deeper? Head over to cruisecountry.com and take your health and performance to a level most people think is impossible. Remember, stay bold, stay sharp, and always question the norm.